Can you hear?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. One second. Oh, you're gone.
Okay, take two. Can you
Yeah,
get,
can you?
okay,
Yeah, can you hear me?
okay. Yes, I can.
Good.
Where are we at?
We are at Exodus 6-ish.
Exodus 6-ish. Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear the baby crying?
No.
Okay.
Is
She's
she,
very,
oh, she's that loud?
she's very sad.
She's, if you can hear from there, she sounds very sad. Safaria. Yeah, I'm not trusting the internet on the laptop to do it, so I'm using the phone and I'm having trouble with my things and it's annoying.
It's okay.
Knock. Okay. No, I don't have time to do your thing. Thank you, though. Exodus
Well, you
6-ish.
you look super clear.
Well, good.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe because the meeting I just got out of had like 30 people in it, but it's like, oh
Yeah.
wow.
You look good. You sound good too. Just need to get my phone to
Thanks.
sit right. Okay, there we
I
go.
didn't bring the whole microphone and everything down here. I just brought these
Oh, it's because you're in
headset.
the basement. That's right. No,
Hmm.
sound good. You look good.
Yeah.
I had to wear my hat though because my keep us in the Jeep.
Oh,
There we go.
1 second. Just trying to keep an eye on this fire.
Yeah. Oh, I need to see if there's a mute function I can hit easy. Oh, there it is. Okay. On the phone. Oh. Then after this, I can go take a nap and have a day.
There you go.
Yeah, and it's like it looks like the little thing's been dropped. It's got little funkies on it right there, and
Oh,
I'm annoyed. I'm annoyed.
yeah. Well, you don't like to buy it. I mean, you wouldn't mind if they took like knocked 15% off of it, but when they sell it to you as new and then you pull somebody else's stuff out of the pocket, that's annoying.
Right. Well, I'm going to talk to him tomorrow, and see what we can do. Because it was the only large one there.
Mm,
Um, so, and
yeah.
I could have gotten an extra large, but I wanted a little smaller.
So it fit under
Um,
your jacket.
yeah. And then I thought maybe you could wear it, if you're cold. Because I was like, it self heats and it's kind of nice. So like, maybe this is perfectly Rachel outfit. I don't know.
Nice. Nice. I just put
Uh,
some logs in, so I'm trying to keep an eye on it.
yeah.
Make sure it's not doing anything insane.
Ain't nothing wrong with that. Where is everybody?
I don't know.
Didn't
Like, I
cancel
don't
it
think
all.
people mostly come in until the last minute. Although that could be. Who knows? You know? I mean, who knows what the weather is?
Right. Everybody's like, we're cold. We're staying home. I'm not
Well, I
getting on
mean,
Zoom.
or
Zoom,
the
Zoom
electrical
makes me
could,
cold.
yeah, the
Right.
electrical could have gone out.
That's a good point. I'm making use of my CSS notepad,
Oh, nice.
taking notes at work.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Well, I would have thought somebody would have been here by now.
Right?
It's Tuesday,
Oh,
isn't it?
it is.
Go.
It is Tuesday?
Yep.
I'm thinking it is.
Oh, there you are. There's Fred.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hey, how's the weather up there?
Cold. How is it there?
Cold.
Yeah.
It just started to snow about an hour ago.
Yeah. We got
Yeah,
a
it's been
dusting, but hopefully it won't be too
Yeah.
much.
oh, I just got a ding. Okay, nothing important. Sorry, I'm in a hotel using my phone, so this is new technology. We'll see how it works.
Okay. Oh, there's Harold.
There we go.
I'm here. Yep. Okay. Frankie or John and Sue are a little bit late, or maybe they can't make it. But
Yeah, I
I
don't know.
think we ought to go ahead and start.
Okay.
But we're on the second parsha in the book of Exodus. We're sort of just getting into the story about the 10 plagues. Oh, hi, Sue. Sue's here. Okay. So the reading for this coming Shabbat will start on chapter 6 of Exodus and verse 2. And the first section really goes from verse 2 through verse 13. So if someone would like to read that.
Sure. And God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord, and I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai, but in my name, the Lord, I was not known to them. And I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their sojournings, in which they sojourned. And also I myself have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians enslave, and I do remember my covenant. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord. I will take you out from under the burdens of Egypt, and I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great retributions. And I will take you to me as a people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who takes you out from under the burdens of Egypt. And I will bring you to the land that I raised you, my hand in pledge to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And I will give it to you as an inheritance. I am the Lord. And Moses spoke thus to the Israelites, but they did not heed Moses out of shortness of breath and hard bondage. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Come, speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, that he send off the Israelites from his land. And Moses spoke before the Lord, saying, Look, the Israelites did not heed me, and how will Pharaoh heed me? And I am uncircumcised of lips. And the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, and he charged them regarding the Israelites and regarding Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring out the Israelites from the land of Egypt.
Yeah, there's several interesting things about the way the Parsha starts. One is he starts off by saying that I appeared unto Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but not by my name Adonai, which clearly isn't true. If you look at the earlier chapters in Genesis, God is identified as Adonai over and over again with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And so the rabbis had to explain that away somehow. And so the official rabbinic explanation of that is that even though the earlier patriarchs, knew Adonai, they really didn't realize his complete strength until all the things he does in Egypt. So that's what they're meaning. The God Almighty El Shaddai is again one of the other names for God. It's usually translated as the Almighty One or God Almighty. And Shaddai is spelled with the shin, which is why traditionally on a mezuzah, the letter that you see in traditional mezuzah is a shin, standing for Shaddai. Um, also, supposedly that's where Superman gets his emblem on his superhero suit. That S, really represents the shin. I mean, after all, it was created by two Jewish comic strip writers, and they would have been aware of that. Um, and there's another interesting thing in where he makes four promises to them that Moses is supposed to transmit to the people. One is, I will free you, I will deliver you, I will redeem you, and I will take you as my people. Your translation may read a little bit different on some of those, but those are four promises. And this is where the rabbis started a tradition that we drink 4 cups of wine at the Seder. Each cup of
Okay.
wine is linked to one of those promises. Now, though, if you look a little further on, though, in verse 8, he says, I'm going to give you the land. And there's an argument in the Talmud. Some of the rabbis thought that I will give you the land is the fifth promise. So we ought to be drinking 5 cups of wine at the Seder. And the 4 cup faction won. So the tradition is 4 cups. Okay. But the other interesting thing is, if you remember what we covered last week, Moses tells God they don't listen to me because they're too worn out and they're short of breath and they're just crushed by slavery. But the portion we read last week, they did listen to him. And they Moses and Aaron talked to them. The people all rejoice, that they were going to be delivered. And then Pharaoh kind of crushes that by making them do bricks without straw. And so again, you probably have another example in the Bible of two different oral traditions. And they really do contradict each other to a certain extent. But that's the way the Bible's set up. It's a different story here than we had at the end of the last portion. Then what they do with the second part of the reading is the next block of text veers off into another on another subject. They go into the genealogy of the tribe of Levi, just to give sort of the family background for Moses and Aaron. And that part is from verses 14 through 25. So if someone wants to read that section.
Sure. The following are the heads of their respective clans: the sons of Reuben, Israel's firstborn, Enoch and Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Those are the families of Reuben. The sons of Simeon, Jumiel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Saul, the son of a Canaanite woman. Those are the families of Simeon. These are the names of Levi's sons by their lineage: Gershon, Kothan, and Merari. And the span of Levi's life was 137 years. The sons of Gershon, Libni, and Shimei by their families. The sons of Kohath, Amram, Ishar, Hebron, and Uziel, and the span of Kothan's life was 133 years. The son of Merari, sorry if I'm murdering names, Mahali and Mushi, these are the families of the Levites by their lineage. Amram took to the wife his father's sister's Jochebed, and she bore him Aaron and Moses, and the span of Amram's life was 137 years. The sons of Ishar, Korah, Nepheg, and Zikri. The sons of Uziel, Mishael, Elzapan, and Sithri. Aaron took to wife Elishebeh, daughters of Aminadab, and the sister of Nahshon, and she bore him Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. The sons of Korah, Asir, Elkanah, and I'm going to pass on that one. These are the families of the Korahites. And Aaron's son Eleazar took to wife one of Putiel's daughters, and she bore him Phinehas, I think. Those are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites by their families. How much farther am I going?
No, that's really enough. Yeah, they're basically really just giving you the cast of characters for the rest of the Torah. Essentially you've got Moses and Aaron now. You've got Korah, who's going to lead the rebellion against him, later on in the book of Numbers. It also mentions Pinchas, who's going to be a big deal later on in the book of Numbers too. But the interesting, the most startling thing here is that Amram, Moses' father, marries Jochebed, who is his aunt. And this is an incestuous union that is really specifically forbidden. If you look at the book of Leviticus, you're not allowed to do that. And apparently, before they got the Torah, they could get away with that kind of stuff. And this would have been forbidden, after the Torah had been given. And actually, it's not the first example of that. Leviticus also forbids you from marrying a woman and her sister, which is exactly what Jacob did, with Rachel and Leah. Again, it's another forbidden marriage, but they got it in before the Torah was given. Okay, and then with the next section, it gets back to Moses and Pharaoh. Now we're getting into the story of the plagues, and so the next section goes from verse 26 of chapter 6 on to verse 13 of chapter 7. So somebody wants to read that.
I'll read it. You said 26 to where?
It's from, let me look at this again, from 26 on to chapter 7:13.
Okay.
6:26 to 7:13.
Okay. Okay. Please bear with me. It is the same Aaron and Moses to whom Adonai said, bring forth the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop. It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to free the Israelites from the Egyptians. These are the same Moses and Aaron. For when Adonai spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, and Adonai said to Moses, I am Adonai, speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I will tell you. Moses appealed to Adonai, saying, see, I get tongue-tied. How then should Pharaoh heed me? Adonai replied to Moses, See, I place you in the role of God to Pharaoh with your brother Aaron as your prophet. You shall repeat all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh to let the Israelites depart from his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt. When Pharaoh does not heed you, I will lay my hand upon Egypt and deliver my ranks, my people, the Israelites, from the land of Egypt with extraordinary chastisements. And the Egyptians shall I know that I am Adonai when I stretch out my hand over Egypt and bring out Israelites from their midst. This Moses and Aaron did, as Adonai commanded them. So they did. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they made their demand on Pharaoh. Adonai said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh speaks to you and says, produce your marvel, you shall say to Aaron, take your rod and cast it down before Pharaoh. It shall turn into a serpent. So Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh and did just as Adonai had commanded. Aaron cast down his rod in the presence of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and it turned into a serpent. Sounds like the movie.
Mhm.
Then Pharaoh, for his part, summoned the sages and the sorcerers and the Egyptian magician priests. In turn, did the same with their spells. Each cast down his rod, and they turned into serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed their rods. Yet Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them, as Adonai said.
Yeah. If you saw the movie, the bad thing about the movie was they didn't have good computer graphics back then. So the whole thing was kind of clumsy when it turned. The other interesting thing about it is even though all the translations say it's serpent, it may not have been. The Hebrew word for serpent is nachash, but the actual Hebrew word they use in the text here is tanim, which is kind of a general word for any kind of reptile. And a lot of modern scholars think he was probably a crocodile. Crocodiles are very common, in the area of the Nile. And so what the rod probably changed into was a crocodile rather than a snake. Although, Cecil B. DeMille opted for the snake. It was probably easier to do in the
Does that
movie.
have any relation to, I feel like I remember in one of the prophets maybe that Pharaoh is referred to Hatanin Hagadol. And so is it related to like
Yeah.
Pharaoh as a crocodile
Yeah, the
or
great
something?
crocodile. Sometimes Tanim is described as sea monster, but it does mean crocodile. Yeah, it's often used to describe the rulers of Egypt. But apparently they were notorious for the crocodiles along the Nile. Yeah. Then, of course, the other thing is Moses is 80 years old. It's one of the few times you see in the Bible somebody starts their career at the age of 80. And again, the traditional, I think I mentioned this before. The rabbinic tradition is, Moses lived to 120, and that his life was divided up into three periods. The first was 40 years growing up in Pharaoh's palace, and that's when he killed the Egyptian. And then 40 years living with his father-in-law and family in Midian, as a shepherd. And then the last 40 years, starting now from 80 to 120, is when he has his actual career, the actual exodus from Egypt and the 40 years in the desert. Because the verse that's most controversial about all this is, I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that I can multiply my signs and wonders. This is he's inflicting all this on the Egyptians, just to show them who the top god in the Middle East is. Um, and that bothered a lot of the later rabbis, and that's where we get the tradition of the Seder table. When we read off the 10 plagues, you take a drop of wine out of the cup each time, and it represents the fact that we can't be totally happy about this because of all the suffering the Egyptians had to do. Um, but you ask, why did the Egyptians have to do all this suffering? Why couldn't they just been struck blind for a week and the Jews just walk out quietly without any, no violence involved? And it appears to be, that this, God had to show that he was superior to the Egyptian gods. apparently the tellers of these stories really were not monotheists in the sense that they believed in a universal God. The Israelites have their one God, but these other guys have their gods. And so it was important for our God to show that he was an alpha God in the Middle East. And this was the hardening of the heart and all the plagues that follow it. And then the next sign and wonder from the first plague is from verses 14 to 24. Someone want to read that?
Sure. And the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hard. He refuses to send off the people. Go to Pharaoh in the morning. Look, he will be going out to the water, and you shall be poised to meet him on the bank of the Nile. And the staff that turned into a snake you shall take in your hand, and you shall say to him, The Lord God of the Hebrews sent me to you, saying, Send off my people, that they may worship me in the wilderness. And look, you have not heeded us yet. Thus said the Lord, By this you shall know that I am the Lord. Look, I am about to strike with the staff in my hand on the water that is in the Nile, and it will turn into blood. And the fish that are in the Nile will die, and the Nile will stink, and the Egyptians will not be able to drink water from the Nile. And the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Take your staff, and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the rivers, and over their Nile channels, and over their ponds, and over all the gathering of their waters, so that they become blood. And there shall be blood in all of the land of Egypt, and in the trees, and in the stones. And Moses and Aaron did thus, as the Lord had charged. And he raised the staff and struck the water that was in the Nile before the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of his servants. And all the water that was in the Nile turned to blood. And the fish that were in the Nile died, and the Nile stunk, and the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile, and the blood was in all the land of Egypt. And the soothsayers of Egypt did thus with their spells. And Pharaoh's heart toughened, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had spoken. And Pharaoh turned and came into his house, and this too he did not take to heart. And all of Egypt dug round the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the Nile.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because that here the text actually diverges a little bit from the movie because here apparently only the Nile turns to blood, and so the Egyptians can dig wells, and get water in other places. But if you remember the scene from the movie, not only does the water turn to blood, there's some vessels, full of water that are around where Pharaoh is, and they turn to blood also. Water that's not in the Nile turns to blood. But the other interesting thing is if you look at the sequence of plagues, they really ratchet up in severity from one plague to the next. Each one's a little bit harsher than the last one. Like this one is kind of scary, but nobody's really hurt. I mean, the Egyptians have to dig wells to get water, but they're okay, and no one's harmed by this. But each plague gets a little bit worse as they ratchet up. And the second plague is from verse 25, and it goes on to to chapter 8, verse 11. So why don't you read that?
When the 7 days had passed after the Lord struck the Nile, the Lord said to Moses, Go to Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says the Lord, Let my people go, that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will plague your whole country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs, and they shall come up and into your palace, your bedchambers, and your beds, the houses of your couriers, and your people, and your ovens, and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and on your people and on all the couriers. And the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Hold out your arm with the rod over the river, the canals and the ponds, and bring up frogs on the land of Egypt. So Aaron held out his arm over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same with their spells and brought frogs upon the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, Plead with the Lord to remove the frogs from me and my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. And Moses said to Pharaoh, You may have this triumph over me. For what time shall I plead in behalf of you and your couriers and your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses to remain only in the Nile? For tomorrow, he replied. And Moses said, As you say, that you may know that there is none like the Lord our God. The frogs shall retreat from you and your couriers and your people, and will remain only in the Nile. Then Moses and Aaron left the Pharaoh's presence, and Moses cried out to the Lord in the matter of the frogs, which he had inflicted upon the Pharaoh. And the Lord did as Moses asked, and the frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields, and they piled them up in heaps till the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he became stubborn and would not heed them as the Lord had spoken.
So again, you go, the frogs are a little bit more annoying than having to find your own water, but still, it's kind of a nuisance. But still, nobody was hurt by the second plague, really. Um, but then they ratcheted it up a little bit with the third plague, and that one is from verses 12 to 15. Harold, you want to read that? 12 through 15.
Yep. Then Adonai said to Moses, say to Aaron, hold out your rod and strike the dust of the earth, and it shall turn to lice throughout the land of Egypt. And they did so. Aaron held out his arm with the rod and struck the dust of the earth, and vermin came upon human and beast. All the dust of the earth turned to lice throughout the land of Egypt. The magician priests did the like with their spells to produce lice, but they could not. The vermin remained upon human and beast. And the magician priest said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he would not heed them, as Adonai had spoken. And
So
Adonai
here you
said,
have the third. Oh, go ahead.
and
Go
Adonai
ahead.
said to Moses, early in the morning, present yourself to Pharaoh as he is coming out to the water, and say to him, thus says Adonai, let my people go, and then that they may worship me. For if you do not let my people go, I will let loose swarms of insects against you and your courtiers, and your people and your houses. The houses of Egyptians and the very ground they stand on shall be filled with swarms of insects. But on that day, I will set apart the region of Goshen, where my people dwell, so that no swarms of insects shall be there, that you may know that I, Adonai, am in the midst of the land. And I will make a distinction between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall come to pass. And Adonai did so. Heavy swarms of insects invaded Pharaoh's palace and the houses of his courtiers. Throughout the country of Egypt, and the land was ruined because of the swarms of insects. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, go and sacrifice to your God within the land. But Moses replied, it would not be right to do this, for what we sacrifice to our God Adonai is untouchable to the Egyptians. Sorry. If we sacrifice that which is untouchable to the Egyptians before their very eyes, will they not stone us?
Mhm.
So we must go a distance of 3 days into the
Uh-huh.
wilderness and sacrifice to Adonai as our God may command us. Pharaoh said, I will let you go to sacrifice to your God Adonai in the wilderness, but do not go very far. Plead then for me. And Moses said, when I leave your presence, I will plead with Adonai that the swarms of the insects depart tomorrow from Pharaoh and his courtiers and his people, but not let Pharaoh again deceitfully, not let the people go to sacrifice to Adonai. So Moses left Pharaoh's presence and pleaded with Adonai. And Adonai did as Moses asked, removing the swarms of insects from Pharaoh, his courtiers, from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh became stubborn at this time also, and would not let the people go.
Here you basically have the third and fourth plagues. And actually, the Hebrew is kind of obscure here. Nobody's quite sure what the Hebrew terms mean. The third plague is some kind of insect, and depending on what kind of what translation you're using, it may read flies, it may read lice, it may read gnats. The fourth plague, um, it's the Hebrew word is arov, and nobody's quite sure what arov means. Some translations, like the one Harold was reading from, will say it's just another kind of insect. Some of the translations say it's wild beast. And most of the Haggadahs go with wild beasts because it kind of doesn't make sense to have two sets of insect plagues. So the usual translation is that the third plague was the insects, the fourth plague is wild beasts. And again, you see it ratcheting up. You're going from having to find your own water supply, to being bothered by the frogs, which are really harmless, to being bitten by the insect, which is a little more uncomfortable, to having to worry about wild beasts. So each one is kind of ratcheting up the stress a little bit as you go along. And then the fifth plague is starts with chapter 9, and that's verses 1 through 7 on chapter 9. Someone want to read that?
You got it. The Lord said to Moses, Go to Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, Let my people go to worship me. For if you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them, then the land of the Lord will strike your livestock in the fields, the horses, the asses, the camels, the cattle, and the sheep, with a very severe pestilence. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of the Egyptians, so that nothing shall die of all that belongs to the Israelites. The Lord has fixed the time. Tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land. And the Lord did so the next day. Where am I stopping, Fred? I'm sorry.
We're going to verse 7.
And the Lord did so the next day. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but of the livestock of the Israelites, not a beast died. When Pharaoh inquired, he found that not a head of the livestock of Israel had died, yet Pharaoh remained stubborn, and he would not let the people go.
So here you twist it up just one more notch. Here you're getting really serious economic damage in Egypt with them losing their cattle. And then he goes on. This parsha ends really with the sixth plague, and that one goes from verses 8 through 12. Go and pick that one up.
I'll keep trucking. Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Each of you shall take handfuls of soot from the kiln, and let Moses throw it up toward the sky in the sight of the Pharaoh. It shall become a fine dust all over the land of Egypt, and cause an inflammation, breaking out in boils on men and beasts throughout the land of Egypt. So they took the soot of the kiln and appeared before Pharaoh. Moses threw it toward the sky, and it caused an inflammation, breaking out in boils on men and beasts. The magicians were unable to confront Moses because of the inflammation, for the inflammation afflicted the magicians as well as all the other Egyptians. But the Lord stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, and he would not heed them, just as the Lord had told Moses.
Yeah, so here we have plague number 6. And again, it goes up one more notch. Now you're directly attacking the health of the people after the cattle plague. So one of the questions that also comes up is how long a period of time are we talking about? The narrative doesn't give any kind of chronology here. It's just kind of a plague a day thing. It was all over in a couple of weeks. The tradition, the rabbis of the Talmud said it took a year. So that would work out with 10 plagues. That would work out to about maybe 4 or 5 weeks, for each plague, the interval in between the plague. And what comes up is, why was all this necessary? Because God said, that Pharaoh's heart will be hardened. Well, it's one thing to say that I know that Pharaoh will harden his heart. God's supposed to know the future. But according to the rabbis, that doesn't take away from human free will. Pharaoh still had free will, even though God may foresee the future. That's a paradox, but the rabbi said that's just the way it is. But the text doesn't really say that. It says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And, that God deliberately did this, to make so he could go on with the plagues. And meanwhile, the Israelites suffered. They're still slaves. And the Egyptians are suffering. This goes on over the year. And again, the question comes up, was all of this really necessary? And actually, when you think about it, you can make a case that it was. You know, when you think about a case, for instance, of slavery in the South here before the Civil War, you know, when the Civil War was over and the slaves were freed by the 13th Amendment, you know, a few years later, it didn't really work out that well for them because you know, the people that ran the South before the Civil War pretty much took over again. And then you had this Jim Crow system that went on for another 100 years. And these slaves really weren't free really till legislation of the 1960s. And a lot of historians have said, you know, the North really should have been harsher with the South after the war. It should have broken up the Ku Klux Klan when it first organized after the war. It should have prohibited any form of Confederate officers for running for office to run the South. And if they had done that, they might have prevented 100 years of oppression that went on after the Civil War. And so, you know, maybe you can make a case for that. You know, the Egyptians had to be punished to sneak out without all this stuff going on. What if Pharaoh decides he wants to lead an army to Israel to bring them back? What's to stop him from doing it? And so you could probably make an argument that it was the best thing to do was to really crush the Egyptians, so that would be the end of it. They wouldn't have any idea of coming back and re-enslaving the Jews again. You know, at least that's one possible explanation for it. Anybody have any comments or questions of what we covered with this?
God is
Probably
doing
one of the best known. What? Go ahead.
God is doing all of this to show that he's the Alpha God.
It looks like it. Yeah, it really does. I think also you can. I think you know he uses the term signs and wonders over and over again. Signs and wonders. I guess you know another argument could be that he wanted to make Jews. And you can imagine being a Hebrew slave during this time, and all this is going on. And then you have the sea splitting, which we read about later, and then Pharaoh's army being drowned in the sea. You know, that's maybe the idea is to make it so dramatic and so overwhelming that it would be an ancestral memory that would be passed down from generation to generation. He wanted something really dramatic for the Exodus.
Well,
Didn't seem like it worked though, did it?
What was that?
Didn't sound like it worked, did it, with the
No,
Egyptians?
it didn't. It didn't. No. In fact, you know, one of the things that's been pointed out was, you know, later on, when you go on to the story of the 40 years in the desert, you know, which is constant whining, complaining, rebellion, you know, just a miserable 40 years. And you realize that, you know, these are the people who had actually seen the miracles. You know, these people didn't have to have any faith at all. They had actually seen the miracles. They had actually been there, and it didn't seem to do much good.
short-term memory.
Yeah, short-term memory is right. Yeah. Okay. We finished a little bit early tonight. That was kind of a short parsha. Anybody have any other comments on it? Okay, well, we'll pick up with the seventh plague next week
Is
and
that
go on to
verse
the Exodus.
13? Verse 13?
What?
Is that verse 13? 9:13, is that where we're starting next week?
I think so.
Looks
Okay,
like Fred froze, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah, Brett's having connection issues, looks like.
All right.
okay.
Okay, gang. See you next week, maybe.
You guys are all frozen.
Ah,
Oh, there we
Yeah.
go. Okay.
So are you.
Yeah.
See you next week.
Yeah.
Hey, Fred.
Thanks,
I'm getting a
Fred.
little thing that says your internet connection is unstable. Okay. See you guys next week.
okay,
Fred,
bye-bye.
hold on a minute. I lost him. Oh, well.
It'll hold till next week, Harold.
No, well, I really needed to talk to him
Oh,
this week, but that's okay.
try the phone.
Yeah. All righty. Have a good week.